Hello everybody and welcome to our lecture on intercultural transitions. Okay, before we jump into theory on intercultural transitions and adaptation, let's look real quick at possibilities for where people transition between cultures. And one thing that I wanted to point out is that people transition not just internationally, but also within nations. It's possible to transition from one culture to another. Some of you may have moved from one state to another, and depending on the distance or just the specific context of from where you move to where, you can notice that there are huge differences. For example, let's say you would be moving from California to Virginia, or you would be moving from Texas to Michigan, and not only moves with big distances, but also if you move from one place with a very distinct subculture here in the US to a place with a different one, you may notice similar changes too if you were moving internationally. And obviously we could be moving all around the world from one culture to another, and not all cultures, not all moves involve an equal amount of necessary change. Let's say, for example, the large majority of international students from the US who go abroad to study go to other English-speaking countries with the expectation that it will not be as hard. So they would go to Britain, they would go to Australia and New Zealand, and what they find very often is that they're surprised how many things are different. So there may be less difference overall than if you were go to say India or China or Nigeria, but because we don't expect so much difference, it still gets pretty tough sometimes. Okay. Let's look at types of migrants. First, the definition of a migrant is an individual who leaves the primary cultural context in which he or she was raised and moves to a new cultural context for an extended period. Extended period means things longer than our vacation. So if we go somewhere for a couple of weeks or even a month, that does not require a lot of adaptation of us. We may just do a lot of sightseeing, but it does not require a lot of adjustment on our side. So extended period means, let's say, at least half a year, or then after that, more than that. So we can distinguish between different kinds of migrants based on two criteria. Number one, are they coming or going voluntarily? And how long are they staying in the new cultural context? If people move voluntarily and for a short amount of time, we call them sojourners. So international students usually, for example, are sojourners because they come voluntarily and they stay for a limited amount of time. So they are usually planning to go back home. Now, voluntary migrants who plan to stay long term in a new location are called immigrants. So I, for example, got my green card not too long ago, which means that I'm planning to stay long term here in the US, which makes me an immigrant. Okay, then we have involuntary migrants, which are refugees, either short-term or long-term. They are still refugees. Now, refugees who have a hope of returning home, and who manage to return home, maybe because the situation in their home country changes or in their home area changes and is safer again, then they're able to go back and would be short-term refugees, whereas people who are never able to go back would be then long-term refugees. So even if they would then get citizenship in the new country and basically have migrated to that country, they would still be refugees because the initial push for going was not voluntary. They had to leave. So what happens then as people come into a new cultural context is that they will adapt in one way or the other. So the basic definition for adaptation is as follows: the process in which an individual who went through enculturation in one culture and subsequently moved to another culture modifies and or acquires new behaviors as well as attitudes, values, and beliefs to optimize the person-environment fit and chances of goal achievement. That's really, really long, but has a lot of very important aspects that describe this process of adaptation. Number one, a process means goes over time. So you don't arrive and say, today I'll adapt and then tomorrow I'm done with it. No, this is a process over many, 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 many years. It may never actually be something that's completely accomplished. So it's an ongoing process, something we always work on in a new cultural context. People who adapt in a new environment have been enculturated in a different culture, meaning you grew up in a different culture, you learned all their values, all their attitudes, all their beliefs, everything what we learned about how you acquire a culture. That's what you first do with your home culture. That's enculturation. So after being enculturated in one culture, we move to a different one. And what we will notice is that the ways of behavior we've learned in our home culture don't work in a different context, right? Other things are considered appropriate. Other things are considered effective. Other things work. Other things are understood, which means we have to acquire new ways of behaving. We may have to acquire new attitudes, values, and beliefs to fit in our new surroundings. So that's what people do. They may either just add these new behaviors to what they had before or modify what they had. And the goal of adaptation is to optimize the person-environment fit, so the fit between me as a person and my environment, so that I can understand the environment and the environment can understand me and I feel comfortable, which again means that I optimize my chances of goal achievement. Let's say I need to find out some kind of information, and I know in a specific culture the way to find out would be to, say, call a relative and ask somebody who knows, and so on. Now, in a new environment, it may be different. It may be find the information stand or ask a classmate. It could be a random one you've never seen before, but it should be okay. Whatever it is, you have to find out how goals are achieved in this new cultural context. And the better you're adapted, the better you have this fit between you and the environment, the more likely it is that you achieve your goals in life. So the overarching goals are: number one, functional fitness, which we've described with optimizing person-environment fit and the goal achievement, and also psychological health. It makes you really, really uncomfortable if you do not have this person-environment fit. And the better you can get your fit with the environment, the more healthy you're also going to be psychologically. Okay, moving on, some challenges in intercultural transitions. Number one, the loss of the familiar environment. You lose your friends, your family, you lose what you're used to things looking like, what you're used to things working, the food you're used to tasting, the sounds, everything in your environment, everything that makes up your environment suddenly changes, and that is very uncomfortable. Okay? That may be exciting, and we'll talk about that for a few days or even a few weeks, but then you're starting to feel uncomfortable and you think, okay, there's nowhere I can rest here. There's nothing that feels like home, and that is not a good feeling. Now, the established behavioral patterns become ineffective, as I just discussed when we were talking about the definition of adaptation. The way we usually accomplish our goals may not work in a different cultural context. And if I notice, I try to do something and I don't get the response I'm used to getting, that causes anxiety because I don't know what I'm supposed to do, how I can change, how I can do it better. It disrupts our routine. The way we usually used to running our day. I remember, for example, in my year in Taiwan, I'm used to eating certain things for breakfast, which may include some cereal and some yogurt and so on. But those are not things that people necessarily eat for breakfast in Taiwan. Rather, they may eat some warm snacks like egg pancake rolls and things like that. And I have to say, it got my stomach really, really sick to eat these things in the morning. I just didn't feel comfortable. It was too heavy and I just didn't feel right. Okay? And there are a lot of different things that change, that force you to change your routine, which will again also be uncomfortable. And the new environment will challenge your self-image. We have, from being little, we grew to have a certain image of ourselves, and our environment usually mirrors that image back to us. And sometimes things go wrong and somebody gives us a different feedback, but usually it's pretty consistent, right? What we think of ourselves and what the majority of people in our environment mirror back to us. Now, in a different cultural environment, suddenly different things may be noticed. Okay, so for example, again in my year in Taiwan, people would stop me in the street and ask me, "Could you teach me English?" And I would say, "That I'm glad you want to learn a foreign language, but English is not my first language, so you probably want to get a native speaker, right? What about you just go and ask a native speaker?" And they would say, "No, no, no, you would be perfect for it." And I realized that the idea was, if you look European, you probably are a native English speaker, which I knew to be incorrect, but that doesn't change anything about what that culture perceives. If you look European, you have to be English speaking, which means everybody thought that I was American, simply because the majority of European-looking people in Taiwan were American. And that challenges your self-image, because you think, no, I'm not. And yes, I would like to earn some money teaching English, but I think it would not be very honest, because at that point in my life, my English was not quite that good. So that challenges your self-image. On the other hand, too, I got a lot of jobs in Taiwan with modeling and doing photography stuff. Simply because I was light-skinned and I have what's called yellow hair. And that was very much appreciated, which I thought was really weird, because at home a lot of people run around like that and it's not considered anything special. Now, coming to the US, for example, you have to learn how to greet people. And you have to learn that it's the appropriate thing to say, "Hi, how are you?" and just walk by the other person and not answer. Nobody expects an answer. So back at home in Austria, if somebody says, "Hi, how are you?" both people will stop and tell each other how they are. So they will say, "Oh, this happened in my life and that," so it will be a conversation. So here I learned that I have to say, "Hi, how are you?" but then I have to keep walking. Now, that sounds really easy, but it's not. So you're walking and you already get nervous as somebody's approaching that you have to greet that person. Maybe you say hi, but because you're nervous, your face may go all kind of unfriendly looking. And you go by and you think, "No, I screwed this one, okay? I looked socially awkward." Next time you may look friendly and then forget to say what you were supposed to say. Or you look friendly and say, "Hi, how are you?" and you stop because you forgot this other aspect. So your verbals, your non-verbals, everything has to adjust, which means that very often you may end up looking socially awkward. And that challenges your self-image also, because you're not used to thinking of yourself as socially awkward, but suddenly in that new context, you may well look like that to people from that environment. Okay, this is just a little bit about challenges to intercultural transitions. We will look at a number of theories that explain some aspects of intercultural transition. We have three different types of theories, three different ways of focus. The first one is describing the results, and one example of that is various acculturation typology. What it does is describe the outcome of adaptation. After people adapt, what could it look like? Then we have models that look at the process of adaptation over time, and we will look at three different ones, meaning the stress adaptation growth model, the U-curve model, and the W-curve model. And then finally, we have models that look at elements of effectiveness. So what kind of behavior in adaptation is effective and works well? And there, for example, we'll look at the AUM model, or Anxiety Uncertainty Management model, and another cross-cultural adaptation model by Yoon Kim. Okay, we will stop this part of the lecture here right now, and we will look at these theories in the second part of lecture.